Let's dive into one of the most turbulent times in American history. Between 1800 and 1848, the United States was, you could say, at war with itself. Not on a battlefield, at least not yet, but in the halls of Congress, on the farms, and really in the minds of its people. The country was in the middle of a massive identity crisis, trying to figure out what it was and what it was destined to become. This is the story of how that struggle forged a new and deeply conflicted nation.
To really get a feel for the incredible change we're talking about, you just have to look at the before and after. I mean, think about it. In 1800, America is this small, fragile republic, mostly just clinging to the East Coast. It's almost all farms. Fast forward just 48 years, and boom, it's a continental power stretching all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's been totally transformed by factories and immigration, but it's also deeply, deeply divided. So how on earth did a country change that much, that fast?
Well, it all started with a really basic debate over one single question. What kind of country are we actually going to be? And the answer to that really depended on how you read its founding document, the Constitution. This one conflict would pretty much set the stage for everything that was about to happen. You see, at the heart of all of the politics was this one core question. Is the Constitution a strict rule book, or is it more of a flexible guideline? On one side, you had the Democratic Republicans. They were the strict constructionists. For them, if a power wasn't spelled out, word for word, in the Constitution, then the federal government simply couldn't do it. End of story. On the other side were the Federalists, the loose constructionists. They argued that the government had implied powers to do what was necessary. And trust me, this was not just some academic squabble. It had huge, real-world consequences.
And this brings us right to the president himself, Thomas Jefferson, who was the leader of the strict rulebook camp. He suddenly finds himself in a real bind. Napoleon over in France needs money, and he makes this unbelievable offer to sell the entire Louisiana territory for just $15 million. Jefferson knew, he absolutely knew, there was nothing in the Constitution that gave a president the power to buy foreign land.
So what does he do? Well, he does it anyway. And this is what's so fascinating. Despite everything he believed in, the chance to literally double the size of the United States overnight was just too good to pass up. He made the deal. And in that one move, the country's #1 strict constructionist acted a whole lot like a loose constructionist, setting an incredible precedent for presidential power.
Now, at the very same time, federal power was being expanded in a totally different way from a different branch of government. Over in the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Marshall is overseeing this big political drama in a case called Marbury v. Madison. It was all about some last-minute judicial appointments.
So here's the punchline. The guy at the center of it all, William Marbury, he never gets his job. But the Supreme Court gets something way, way bigger. Marshall's ruling establishes this hugely important principle called judicial review. It's the power of the Supreme Court to look at a law passed by Congress and say, nope, that's unconstitutional. This completely shifted the balance of power, basically making the court the final umpire on what the Constitution actually means.
All right, so America is getting bigger and the federal government is getting more powerful. Let's see what happens when this young nation starts to flex its muscles beyond its own borders and try to prove itself on the world stage.
That big test came with the War of 1812. The British were still causing problems, like kidnapping American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. They called it impressment. So America goes to war. And even though technically it was kind of a draw, for Americans it felt like a massive victory. They called it their second war for independence. The result, a huge explosion of national pride. It also spelled the end for the Federalist Party, which had opposed the war. But it also revealed a major problem. The country's banking and transportation systems were a mess.
Riding high on this new wave of confidence, President James Monroe makes a really bold statement to the world. The Monroe Doctrine was basically a giant keep out sign posted over the Americas, aimed squarely at Europe. It said, "This is our neighborhood now. You stay out." It was a clear signal of America's growing ambition. But while America was looking outward, an even bigger, more transformative revolution was happening right at home. This one would completely change the economy and how everyday people live their lives. They called it the Market Revolution, and it was a total reinvention of American life. I mean, the old world of small farms, where families pretty much grew and made everything they needed for themselves, that was disappearing. In its place, you get this new interconnected national economy with factories, big commercial farms, and millions of people working for wages instead of for themselves.
Now, this didn't just happen randomly. It was actively guided by a set of policies from a senator named Henry Clay, a plan he called the American System. The idea was simple. Use the federal government's power to tie the country together economically. So you'd have tariffs to protect northern factories, a national bank to provide credit, and then federal money to build roads and canals to link the farmers out west with the markets back east. And the whole thing was just supercharged by this incredible rapid-fire burst of innovation. Eli Whitney's cotton gin makes cotton the king of the South, which feeds the textile mills in the North. Robert Fulton's steamboat turns rivers into two-way superhighways for trade. The idea of interchangeable parts kicks off mass production. And then massive projects like the Erie Canal and the new railroads physically stitch the country together like never before.
All of this economic change and upheaval creates a brand new kind of politics. It's way more aggressive, you could say more democratic, and it's all personified by one larger-than-life figure, Andrew Jackson.
So this whole era kicks off with one of the craziest elections in American history. In 1824, Andrew Jackson wins the most popular votes, but nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College. So it goes to the House of Representatives. And there, Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, throws his support to John Quincy Adams. Adams wins, and what's the first thing he does? He names Henry Clay his Secretary of State. Jackson's supporters went absolutely ballistic, screaming that it was a corrupt bargain that stole the election from the people.
Jackson uses that public fury to storm into the presidency in 1828, and he comes in with a clear mission. He's the champion of the common man, fighting against the elites. And his number one enemy? The Second Bank of the United States. He called it a monster that only helps the rich and powerful, and he was determined to destroy it, which he eventually did. But, and this is a huge but, this new democracy for white men came at an absolutely brutal and tragic cost for others. In a stunning use of presidential power, Jackson just openly defied a Supreme Court ruling that had sided with the Cherokee Nation. He pushed through the Indian Removal Act, which led to the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands. That forced march, known as the Trail of Tears, was a humanitarian disaster, killing over 4,000 Cherokee men, women, and children. So you can start to see the problem here, right? All these huge forces, this push west, the market revolution, this new Jacksonian democracy, they were building the nation up while also tearing it apart. They were exposing these deep, dangerous cracks in the foundation of the country. And the biggest crack, the one everyone was terrified of, was slavery. When Missouri wanted to join the Union as a slave state, it threatened to completely wreck the balance of power between free and slave states in the Senate. The Missouri Compromise was basically a Band-Aid. Okay, Missouri can come in as a slave state, but to keep things balanced, Maine will come in as a free state. And then they drew a line across the rest of the Western territories saying no slavery north of this line. But everybody knew this was just kicking the can down the road. It wasn't a real solution. Even the now elderly Thomas Jefferson saw the danger, famously calling the whole debate a fire bell in the night that woke him with terror. He said he saw it as the death knell of the Union. The compromise papered over the problem for a while, but it solved nothing. But here's the wild paradox. At the very same time the country's fracturing, you also get this huge explosion of people trying to fix society. It was sparked by a big religious revival called the Second Great Awakening, and it inspired all these movements to perfect America. You had people crusading against alcohol, demanding the immediate abolition of slavery, fighting for better prisons and asylums, and in 1848, at the Seneca Falls Convention, launching the modern movement for women's rights. So, by 1848, the United States is almost unrecognizable from what it was. It's bigger, it's richer, it's more connected, and for some, it's more democratic. But this incredible story of growth leaves us with a really critical question. As this new American identity was being forged, who was it really being built for, and who was being left behind, or even crushed, in the process?